The HOA president is throwing her daughter's $100,000 dream wedding right now on my private dock. No call, no permission, just pure entitled arrogance. 60 guests in designer gowns, massive white tent, champagne towers, string quartet, all on my waterfront that I've owned for decades. This is Delilah Thornbridge, the same nightmare who slapped me with thousands in bogus fines for unsafe dock conditions on a structure that survived hurricanes since 1987. She thinks she can hijack my property for her perfect Instagram moment? The bride and groom are posing for million-dollar shots right now, everyone laughing and clueless, while I sit here with my coffee staring at those thick anchor ropes holding everything together. Funny thing about unsafe dock conditions, sometimes they become a self-fulfilling prophecy. What would you do? Drop your craziest HOA revenge story below. I read every one. Hit subscribe because what happens next will make every entitled Karen think twice. Let me tell you how I ended up at war with the most entitled woman in 3 counties. I'm Meredith Chen Williams, 52, former marine biologist turned environmental consultant who escaped to Lake Serenity after my divorce got messier than a toddler's spaghetti dinner. Used my inheritance to buy this perfect waterfront cottage with a hand-built dock that survived everything Mother Nature threw at it since 1987. The property sits on nearly an acre, massive for this neighborhood where most lots are cramped postage stamps. My deed specifically states waterfront extends to the ordinary high water mark, a legal detail that becomes crucial later. Sweet old Mrs. Kowalski sold to me specifically because I promised to preserve her late husband's handcrafted dock rather than tear it down for some McMansion monstrosity. This dock isn't just my morning coffee spot, it's my livelihood. I use it as a research platform for water quality testing contracts across 3 states. The irony? My marine engineering background from 30 years designing offshore platforms means I know exactly how much abuse these structures can handle. Then Hurricane Delilah moved in. Picture every HOA president nightmare, add bleached blonde hair, designer everything, and a white Mercedes with vanity plates reading HOA CEO. Her daughter Brittany just got engaged to some developer's spoiled rich kid, and apparently daddy's political connections weren't enough. Princess needed the perfect Instagram wedding venue. 3 weeks after I unpacked my last box, the harassment began. Violation notice number 1 arrived on crisp HOA letterhead. Unapproved dock modifications, $500 fine. The dock hadn't been touched since Bush Sr. was president, but apparently my railing height violated some imaginary standard. I marched over with original building permits proving everything was legal. Standing on my dock in her 4-inch heels, Delilah reeked of perfume that probably cost more than my car payment, lecturing me about community standards while my coffee grew cold and loons called mockingly across the morning mist. Her response? Violation number 2. Excessive algae growth beneath dock structure, $300 fine. She was literally fining me for algae that's been growing naturally since the Jurassic period. Mrs. Patterson, my 78-year-old neighbor, quietly revealed Delilah's real game: systematic harassment forcing waterfront owners to sell cheap. Her husband's shell companies had already snatched 3 properties at 60 cents on the dollar for their luxury condo project. My deepwater dock access was the final piece. The violations escalated faster than my blood pressure. Mandatory inspections scheduled during my research trip. Return to orange warning tags flapping like surrender flags, claiming my hurricane-tested dock was an immediate safety hazard. Security cameras caught their inspector spending 12 minutes on my property, mostly taking personal calls. The sharp crack of those plastic tags snapping in the lake breeze still makes my eye twitch. New demand: $2,000 fine plus dock removal unless certified safe by their approved engineer. Plot twist: Delilah's brother-in-law charging $3,500 for his expert opinion. Research revealed this family scam had condemned 6 waterfront structures in 2 years. All 6 properties mysteriously got purchased by Delilah's husband's companies at fire sale prices. I hired my own marine engineer who confirmed what I already knew. My dock exceeded safety standards by 40%. Filed state complaints. Organized neighborhood meetings revealing Delilah's selective enforcement. Her cronies got warnings, everyone else got hammered. The community split. Original residents supported me, tired of Delilah's power trips. Newer residents feared property values would tank without proper enforcement. The showdown came at our monthly HOA meeting in the community center, reeking of burnt coffee and broken dreams. Delilah's supporters packed the room 12 to 8, shouting down opposition while she smirked from her folding chair throne. That night, watching her minions vote down every reasonable compromise, I realized this wasn't about safety or standards. This was about power, money, and teaching some divorced environmental consultant that she didn't belong in their perfect kingdom. They picked the wrong engineer to intimidate. 2 weeks later, Delilah decided subtlety was overrated. I returned from a 3-day research contract to find my dock transformed into a disaster movie set. Orange condemned signs zip-tied to every post, yellow caution tape wrapped around railings like crime scene decoration, and a formal notice demanding immediate cessation of all hazardous dock activities. I collect water samples with a pH meter at sunrise, not manufacture explosives. The violation notice claimed emergency inspection due to anonymous neighbor complaints about structural instability. Security footage told the real story. Their certified inspector spent 14 minutes on my property, carefully staging photographs to make my hurricane-tested dock look dangerous. The metallic click of his clipboard against my railings echoed across the water as he worked his angles like some twisted real estate photographer. Here's what that inspection report didn't mention, something I discovered after digging through state contractor licensing records late that night. Their independent inspector wasn't independent at all. He worked for the same engineering firm that would pocket $12 grand rebuilding my condemned dock. I'd seen this scam before in coastal development projects. Create the problem, sell the solution, split the profits. New demand, $3,500 fine plus complete dock removal within 15 days, or hire their approved contractor for emergency stabilization at highway robbery prices. When I laughed in her face, Delilah filed county complaints claiming my research equipment contaminated the lake, an environmental scientist contaminating the environment. The irony could have powered a small city. Time to play their game, but better. My background investigating offshore platform failures taught me that patterns reveal everything. 4 other waterfront properties had been condemned using identical inspection language. Word for word, identical. Either this guy was incredibly lazy or following a script. Each property got purchased within 6 months by shell companies that traced back to Delilah's husband's development empire. I compiled evidence packages like I was building a federal case, because honestly, I probably was. State HOA oversight complaints, ethics violations against their pet inspector, documentation of the systematic property grab scheme that would make organized crime blush. Mrs. Patterson became my secret weapon, providing 35 years of historical dock photos proving 0 structural changes. Their recent deterioration claims crumbled faster than week-old crackers. Delilah's counter-assault was immediate and personal. Daily harassment disguised as wellness checks began at dawn. County inspectors claiming concerned neighbors reported suspicious late-night activity would find me conducting legitimate research and act shocked that environmental monitoring involved actual equipment. Each visit generated fresh violations: industrial equipment on residential property, improper vessel storage, and my personal favorite, excessive outdoor lighting for one solar pathway light. The smell of fresh legal documents and mounting stress became my new normal. But Delilah's masterstroke was economic warfare. Anonymous calls to my consulting clients warning about my legal troubles and questioning my professional reliability. 3 contracts canceled within a week, $8,000 in lost income that hurt worse than any fine. She was systematically destroying my ability to fight back by cutting off my funding. Smart, vicious, and probably illegal. The neighborhood turned into a psychological battlefield. Anonymous letters appeared in mailboxes warning about radical environmentalists and outside agitators. My morning coffee routine now included checking for new violations taped to my door and scanning the lake for surveillance. The monthly community meeting was my chance to strike back. Delilah arrived early with her supporters, filling the front rows of the community center that reeked of industrial carpet cleaner and decades of bitter disputes. She'd prepared a slick presentation about protecting property values from environmental extremism, complete with misleadingly cropped photos of my research equipment. When my turn came, I stayed calm and methodical. Shell company ownership records showing the paper trail. Inspector licensing documents revealing conflicts of interest. Timeline correlations between condemnations and suspicious purchases. The ancient air conditioning wheezed and struggled while I systematically dismantled her narrative with facts. Watching Delilah's face cycle through confusion, anger, and barely controlled panic was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building this case. Her supporters shifted uncomfortably as they realized they might be accessories to something that could land them in federal court. The vote was still 8-7 in her favor, but cracks were showing. 3 neutral board members demanded independent investigation of my allegations. More importantly, the room's energy had shifted. Delilah was no longer the unquestioned authority figure. Walking to my car under the parking lot's buzzing fluorescent lights, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope mixed with determination. She still held power, still had connections, still posed a serious threat, but I'd spent 3 decades solving impossible engineering problems under crushing pressure. Delilah Thornbridge was about to learn that systematic harassment works both ways, and I was much better at documentation than she was. Game on. Delilah's desperation reached new heights when she decided to involve fake federal agencies. I'm checking my mail Tuesday morning when I find an official-looking envelope from U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Emergency Response Division. My coffee goes cold as I read demands for immediate inspection of my unpermitted hazardous waste facility, with threats of $10,000 daily fines starting immediately. Hazardous waste facility. I own a pH meter and some sample bottles, not Chernobyl. The letter looked legit at first glance. Official seal, case number, even a badge photo of the investigating agent. But something felt wrong. The return address was a P.O. box, the grammar was slightly off, and the contact phone number had a local area code instead of the federal government's 800 prefix I'd dealt with for years. 20 minutes of research revealed the beautiful truth. This entire letter was fabricated. The case number was fake, the investigating agent didn't exist, and the EPA Emergency Response Division had never heard of me or my hazardous facility. Someone had committed federal mail fraud to intimidate me, and federal mail fraud carries serious prison time. Game-changing mistake, Princess Delilah. But while I'm celebrating this legal jackpot, my insurance agent calls with devastating news. My homeowner's policy is canceled effective immediately due to fraudulent application and undisclosed high-risk activities. Anonymous photos of my dock with fabricated damage reports had been submitted claiming structural failures that would cost $50,000 to repair. The metallic taste of panic filled my mouth as I realized how coordinated this attack was. No insurance means no mortgage compliance, which means foreclosure proceedings within 90 days. Delilah wasn't just trying to force me out anymore, she was systematically destroying my financial foundation. The insurance photos were professionally doctored, showing cracks and rot that didn't exist on my perfectly maintained dock. Someone had invested serious money in Photoshop skills to create evidence of damage that could be verified with a 5-minute visual inspection. My property tax assessment arrived the same week, tripling my cottage's valuation overnight. According to county records, I'd apparently installed a commercial boat lift, luxury guest quarters, and expanded my dock to accommodate yacht mooring, none of which existed in reality. The smell of fresh bureaucratic ink on these fraudulent documents was overwhelming my kitchen table as the scope of conspiracy became clear. This wasn't random harassment anymore. This was organized financial warfare designed to force bankruptcy and property abandonment. But here's what Delilah didn't understand about marine engineers. We're trained to solve problems under crushing pressure when lives depend on getting it right. And right now, my life depended on dismantling her operation with surgical precision. I spent the next week building a federal criminal case like I was investigating a platform collapse. Mail fraud for the fake EPA letter, insurance fraud for the doctored photos, tax fraud for the fictional property improvements, conspiracy charges for coordinating harassment through multiple government systems. The paper trail was extensive and beautiful. Campaign contribution records linking Delilah's husband to Commissioner Morrison, who approved my tax reassessment. Family connections between the insurance agent and HOA board members. Business relationships between the fake inspector and Delilah's development company. Every connection documented with timestamps, amounts, and legal implications that would make federal prosecutors salivate. My consulting background in industrial accident investigation taught me that system failures always follow predictable patterns. Delilah's operation was following the classic pattern of escalating desperation, increasing sloppiness, and expanding conspiracy that creates multiple prosecution opportunities. The community was starting to notice the obvious harassment campaign. Mrs. Patterson mentioned neighbors asking questions about the constant stream of county vehicles, inspectors, and official-looking people taking photos of my property. Even hardcore Delilah supporters seemed uncomfortable with the intensity of attacks. 3 families had quietly approached me expressing concern about their own property assessments being manipulated. Fear was spreading through the neighborhood as people realized no one was safe from Delilah's revenge machine if they crossed her. The monthly board meeting was 5 days away, and I was done playing defense. This time, I was presenting a comprehensive federal criminal case with documented evidence of mail fraud, tax fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy involving multiple government officials. Not accusations or theories, hard evidence with case law citations and federal statute violations clearly identified. I was going to dare every board member to continue supporting someone facing potential federal prison time. Make them choose between community politics and criminal liability. Delilah had escalated this conflict into federal crime territory, apparently believing her local political connections could protect her from federal investigation. She was about to learn that environmental consultants deal with federal agencies regularly, know exactly how federal criminal investigations work, and have professional contacts who take fraud very seriously. The taste of victory was already sweetening my morning coffee. Time to see how brave her supporters really were when facing FBI attention. 3 days before the monthly board meeting, Delilah made her most desperate move yet. She tried to have me arrested. I'm enjoying my morning coffee on the dock when 2 sheriff's deputies pull into my driveway. The sound of car doors slamming echoes across the quiet lake like gunshots, sending a flock of geese into panicked flight. "Ma'am, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of environmental terrorism and threats against public officials," Deputy Martinez announces, hand resting on his handcuffs. Environmental terrorism. For collecting water samples with a pH meter. The arrest warrant claimed I'd threatened to poison the community water supply and sabotage municipal infrastructure based on a sworn complaint from concerned citizen Delilah Thornbridge. The charges were insane, but arrest warrants don't care about sanity. They care about signatures from judges who don't ask too many questions. 20 minutes later, I'm sitting in county jail processing, still wearing my coffee-stained pajamas and wondering how the hell my life reached this point. The metallic smell of institutional disinfectant and the echo of slamming steel doors was my welcome to Delilah's newest harassment strategy. But here's what happens when you arrest someone who spent years working with federal environmental agencies. You give them access to a phone call that reaches people with actual authority. My contact at the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division was very interested to learn that local officials were filing false charges against a federal environmental consultant. Within 3 hours, federal marshals were having serious conversations with county sheriff department about improper use of arrest warrants and what appeared to be a systematic harassment campaign. The charges were dropped by dinner time, but the damage was done. Local news covered my arrest with headlines about environmental extremist detained, while burying the later retraction on page 12. Delilah had weaponized the legal system itself, turning law enforcement into her personal intimidation squad. That's when I realized she'd crossed a line that transformed this from neighborhood politics into federal conspiracy territory. The board meeting 3 days later was packed with curiosity seekers drawn by news coverage and rumors of federal investigation. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as people whispered about FBI evidence boxes and criminal charges. The acrid smell of stress sweat mixed with burnt coffee created an atmosphere thick enough to cut. I arrived with one simple prop, a single manila envelope containing the most devastating evidence I'd discovered. Delilah entered like a conquering hero, apparently believing my arrest had proven her accusations and destroyed my credibility. She'd prepared a presentation about protecting the community from radical environmental activism, with enlarged photos of my research equipment labeled as potential weapons of contamination. When my turn came to respond, I stood calmly and opened that manila envelope. 2 weeks ago, I submitted a formal complaint to the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding systematic mail fraud, tax fraud, and conspiracy to violate civil rights, I announced to the dead silent room. Today, I received confirmation that federal prosecutors have opened a full criminal investigation. I held up an official FBI case file number and contact information for the investigating agent. But that wasn't the nuclear bomb I'd brought to detonate. However, during my research into property records and financial documents, I discovered something even more interesting than individual crimes. I paused, letting tension build like pressure in a failing pipeline. I found the money trail. The envelope contained bank records, contractor payments, and financial documents revealing how Delilah had been funding her harassment campaign. HOA community funds, thousands of dollars collected from homeowner fees, had been illegally diverted to pay for bogus inspections, fraudulent legal fees, and bribes to corrupt officials. She hadn't just been stealing property. She'd been stealing from every homeowner in the community to finance her operation. The room erupted in angry voices as neighbors realized they'd been paying for their own harassment. Board members who'd supported her started backing away like she'd caught fire. Even her closest allies were calculating how much money they might be personally liable for in civil lawsuits. Delilah's face went from confident to terrified to absolutely murderous as she watched 30 years of reputation management evaporate in real time. When angry homeowners started demanding immediate financial audits and restitution, she finally snapped. "This is all lies!" she screamed, her perfect composure cracking like thin ice. "That woman is a terrorist who's been sabotaging our community. I won't let her destroy everything I've built." The raw hatred in her voice sent chills through the room. This wasn't political disagreement anymore. This was personal vendetta with someone completely unhinged. Mrs. Patterson stood up from the back row with perfect timing. "I motion for immediate removal of Delilah Thornbridge from all HOA positions pending federal investigation and financial audit." The vote was unanimous. Even her own daughter abstained. But watching Delilah's eyes as she stormed out, I knew this wasn't over. She'd lost everything: position, reputation, freedom, and blamed me for all of it. Desperate people with nothing left to lose are capable of anything. The envelope that destroyed Delilah's world arrived the morning after her public humiliation, hidden among credit card offers like a ticking time bomb. Official letterhead from Clearwater County Clerk's Office. RE Property Research Request, historical documentation. I'd nearly forgotten about the record search I'd filed weeks ago, desperately hunting for any legal ammunition to fight back. What I found was a nuclear weapon. The smell of aged paper and faded ink filled my kitchen as I unfolded documents that had been gathering dust since 1967. Original Lake Community Covenant creating the Clearwater Cove Waterfront Preservation Trust, a perpetual federal conservation easement protecting the entire lake ecosystem from commercial development. Every single property in our neighborhood, including mine, was permanently protected by federal environmental law. No condos, no resort, no development within 200 feet of water, ever. Delilah's husband had spent 5 years and millions of dollars assembling properties for a project that federal law made permanently impossible. But here's where it gets beautiful. Mrs. Patterson texted me to come over. She'd found something in her late husband's papers that completed the picture. Henry had been president of the original Conservation Committee, and she'd kept every document from 1967. 20 minutes later, I'm holding meeting minutes that revealed the conservation easement's most powerful protection: explicit federal authority for environmental monitoring and research activities on all waterfront properties. My water quality testing wasn't just legal, it was federally protected conservation work. Every violation Delilah filed was federal harassment of protected environmental research. Henry always knew someone would try to destroy the lake for money. Mrs. Patterson smiled, her eyes sparkling with the satisfaction of a 55-year checkmate. That's why they made the easement bulletproof. The criminal implications were staggering. 12 properties purchased through systematic harassment, all subject to conservation restrictions that made their development dreams impossible. Environmental crimes under federal protection carry mandatory prison sentences. Property fraud involving federal easements triggers RICO prosecution. They weren't facing local corruption charges anymore. They were looking at decades in federal prison. But while I'm celebrating this legal victory, Mrs. Patterson drops the most interesting detail of all. Delilah stopped by yesterday asking about dock rental fees, she mentions casually. Said Brittany needed a perfect waterfront venue for her wedding next month. Asked if any neighbors might rent their docks for a substantial payment. Wedding. Next month. Waterfront venue. The pieces clicked together like a precision engineering mechanism. Delilah's harassment campaign wasn't just about property acquisition. It was about eliminating obstacles to her daughter's dream wedding. She needed guaranteed access to the most beautiful waterfront in our community for Brittany's fairy tale moment. My waterfront. My dock. The conservation easement documentation revealed something else crucial. As the property owner conducting federally protected environmental research, I had exclusive authority over waterfront access for conservation and monitoring purposes. Even if she somehow forced me to allow the wedding, federal law gave me the right to terminate any activity that interfered with protected environmental work. That's when the most delicious revenge plan started forming in my engineer's mind. If Delilah wanted to use my dock for her daughter's wedding, she'd have to risk everything on my cooperation. One phone call to federal environmental enforcement could shut down any unauthorized commercial use of protected conservation property. But here's what made it perfect. The dock's original 1967 construction included removable sections designed for winter storm protection. Marine-grade quick-release mechanisms that could separate the platform into floating sections during extreme weather events. The same federal easement that protected my environmental research also protected my right to maintain the dock's historical configuration and safety features, including those very special winter storm protocols. Delilah wanted the perfect waterfront wedding venue. She was about to get exactly what she deserved. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of smile that comes from holding 4 aces while your opponent thinks they're winning with a pair of 2s. My coffee tasted better than it had in months as I spread those beautiful 1967 blueprints across my kitchen table. The conservation easement wasn't just legal protection. It was my get-out-of-jail-free card for what I was about to do to Delilah's perfect wedding. But first, I needed to understand exactly how my dock was designed to fall apart. Those brilliant 1960s engineers had built something beautiful, a floating platform with deliberate weak points for storm protection. The outer 60-foot section connected to the main dock through 4 marine-grade quick-release pins disguised as decorative post caps. When weight exceeded safe limits, the section could be separated to prevent total destruction during hurricanes. It was like having a self-destruct button hidden in plain sight. The release mechanism was simple enough for anyone with basic marine knowledge: 2 spring-loaded pins requiring simultaneous activation from different locations. One key accessible from my cottage's kitchen window, another from the dock's utility box. Turn both keys at the same time and physics takes over. For anyone wondering about waterfront safety engineering, the principle is straightforward. Floating platforms need emergency separation capability to prevent catastrophic failure under extreme loads. Like, say, 60 wedding guests and professional catering equipment all crowded together for the perfect photo. Testing the mechanism with sandbags that afternoon, I couldn't stop grinning at how smoothly the separation worked. The outer section floated perfectly stable thanks to sealed chambers underneath. No one would drown, but everyone would definitely get an unexpected swimming lesson. The legal beauty was even more satisfying than the engineering. My environmental lawyer practically laughed out loud when I explained the situation. You have federal authority to prevent unauthorized commercial use of protected conservation property, she confirmed. Activating historical safety mechanisms to protect environmental research from illegal interference? That's not revenge, that's law enforcement. The conservation easement gave me explicit rights to maintain historical dock configuration and safety protocols for environmental protection. If anyone questioned separating the platform during unauthorized commercial activity, I had 55 years of legal precedent backing my actions. Mrs. Patterson provided the perfect intelligence when she casually mentioned Brittany's wedding date, Labor Day weekend, same weekend as our annual Lake Community Festival. The timing couldn't be better for maximum witness coverage and media documentation. I made a few strategic phone calls to EPA colleagues mentioning the ongoing investigation and potential commercial violations of federal conservation property. They were very interested in routine compliance monitoring during festival weekend, especially documenting any unauthorized activities that might interfere with protected environmental research. Federal environmental investigators would just happen to be in the neighborhood with cameras ready. The marina owner across the lake offered his pontoon boat for festival photography, positioning federal witnesses with perfect sight lines to my dock. Local newspaper reporters covering community events would have front row seats to whatever developed. Everything was aligning like planets for a perfect eclipse of justice. I spent the week practicing the release sequence until muscle memory took over. 30 seconds from decision to activation. Turn 2 keys simultaneously. Watch physics demonstrate why weight limits exist, then calmly explain to federal investigators how I protected conservation property from commercial violations. The psychological preparation was just as crucial. Delilah would likely arrive with threats, bribes, lawyers, security guards, or attempts to involve local law enforcement. None of it mattered. Federal environmental law trumps local politics, and conservation easements supersede HOA authority. I had absolute legal rights to protect federally designated research property from unauthorized commercial use. But the sweetest irony was realizing that Delilah's 2-year harassment campaign had actually strengthened my position. Every bogus violation she'd filed was now documented federal harassment of protected environmental work. Every fake inspection was evidence of systematic interference with conservation research. Her criminal behavior had transformed me from vulnerable homeowner into federal environmental researcher with explicit legal protection. The dock's emergency separation system was about to serve its original purpose, protecting historical infrastructure from excessive loads during extreme conditions. Conditions like hosting an illegal commercial wedding on federally protected property. The smell of autumn air mixed with anticipation as I finalized preparations. Federal backup positioned, legal authority confirmed, safety mechanisms tested and ready. Labor Day weekend would bring Delilah's perfect fairy tale wedding to my perfect waterfront venue. She'd get exactly what she deserved. An unforgettable demonstration of physics, federal law, and the consequences of systematic criminal harassment. The taste of approaching justice was absolutely delicious. Princess Brittany's dream wedding was about to become a nightmare that federal investigators would document for prosecutorial evidence. Time to see how well designer wedding gowns handle unexpected lake swimming. The week before Labor Day, Delilah's desperation reached levels that would have been hilarious if they weren't so dangerous. Monday morning brought an unmarked van parked across from my cottage with 2 men in cheap suits pretending to read newspapers while photographing my every move. The smell of their cigarette smoke drifted across the lake as they conducted the world's most obvious surveillance operation. By Tuesday, someone had cut my internet cable and disabled my cell phone tower reception. Just technical difficulties that mysteriously affected only my property. When I drove to town for supplies, the same van followed at a distance that suggested these guys learned surveillance from watching bad movies. Wednesday escalated to direct intimidation. A process server arrived claiming I was being sued for intentional infliction of emotional distress by the Thornbridge family. The lawsuit demanded $500,000 in damages for malicious prosecution and sought immediate restraining orders preventing me from interfering with community events. The legal papers looked official until I noticed they were filed in a court that didn't exist, signed by a judge whose name Google couldn't find, and contained enough spelling errors to embarrass a middle schooler. Someone had spent serious money creating fake legal documents designed to panic me into compliance. But the real desperation showed Thursday morning when Delilah herself appeared at my door with a briefcase full of cash. "I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for 1 day's rental of your dock," she announced, standing on my porch like a mafia don making an offer I couldn't refuse. Cash payment, no questions asked, no further harassment. 50 grand. For 1 day. The number proved how much money was riding on this wedding and how desperately she needed my cooperation. "Not interested," I replied, savoring the way her perfectly composed expression cracked slightly. 100,000, she countered immediately. "Cash, right now. Just say yes and walk away for the weekend." The fact that she could casually offer 100 grand suggested this wedding was about more than her daughter's happiness. This was about cementing political alliances, business relationships, and social standing that her criminal investigation had put in jeopardy. "Still not interested. This is federally protected conservation property, not a wedding venue rental business." Her mask finally slipped completely. "You have no idea what you're messing with," she hissed, leaning closer with eyes that burned with pure hatred. "People who interfere with my family's happiness tend to have very unfortunate accidents." Death threats. She'd just made actual death threats in front of security cameras while offering bribes for illegal use of federal conservation property. Interesting choice of words, Delilah. You might want to check local news tonight. Channel 7 is running part 2 of their HOA corruption investigation featuring audio recordings of some very interesting conversations. The color drained from her face as she realized I'd been recording everything. Friday brought the final escalation, attempted sabotage of the dock itself. I woke to sounds of power tools coming from the waterfront at 3 a.m. Security cameras captured 3 figures in dark clothing attempting to damage the release mechanism pins. apparently hoping to prevent the separation system from functioning. What they didn't understand was marine engineering redundancy. The original designers had built multiple activation methods because storm damage to safety systems could be catastrophic. They were tampering with the primary release while completely missing the backup manual override. But watching them work revealed something crucial. Delilah knew exactly how the dock separation system operated. Someone had provided detailed technical information about the mechanism, which meant she'd figured out my plan and was trying to sabotage my revenge. The taste of metallic fear mixed with excitement filled my mouth as I realized the stakes had escalated beyond neighborhood politics. This was now active conspiracy to prevent federal environmental law enforcement, destruction of historical conservation infrastructure, and criminal interference with protected research property. I contacted my EPA liaison immediately. Federal agents were very interested in documenting attempted sabotage of conservation property by subjects under federal investigation. Environmental crimes investigators would be monitoring my property 24/7 through the weekend. Saturday morning, wedding day, arrived with the crisp September air that makes Lake Country beautiful and the kind of tension that precedes thunderstorms. The first catering truck appeared at 6 a.m., followed by florist vans, equipment rentals, and a parade of vendors who apparently believed they had legal authority to set up commercial operations on my private waterfront. By 10 a.m., my dock was transformed into an elaborate wedding venue complete with white silk tent, professional sound system, and enough folding chairs to seat 80 guests. The weight distribution was already approaching the platform's design limits before guests even arrived. Federal investigators positioned across the lake documented every violation with telephoto lenses, while local media prepared for what they expected would be a routine community festival story. None of them knew they were about to witness the most spectacular wedding disaster in county history. Princess Brittany's fairy tale was about to meet cold lake water, federal law, and 30 years of engineering expertise with a grudge. Wedding day morning brought chaos that looked like a military operation disguised as a fairy tale. The invasion began at dawn with a convoy of white vehicles that stretched from my driveway to the main road. Catering trucks, equipment rentals, florist vans, and a limousine that cost more than most people's cars, all descending on my property like they owned it. The smell of expensive flowers mixed with diesel exhaust created a surreal atmosphere as strangers in matching uniforms transformed my peaceful waterfront into something from a luxury wedding magazine. By 8 a.m., my dock was unrecognizable under layers of white silk, crystal chandeliers powered by portable generators, and enough professional catering equipment to feed a small army. The platform groaned audibly under weight that was already testing its 60-year-old engineering limits. I watched from my kitchen window, sipping coffee and counting violations of federal conservation law with the satisfaction of someone holding a royal flush while everyone else argued over pocket change. Professional wedding photographers snapping hundreds of photos of rustic lakefront venue. Unauthorized commercial use of protected property. Check. Catering company setting up full kitchen operations on historical conservation dock. Violation of environmental protection regulations. Check. Sound equipment and electrical systems operating without environmental impact permits on federally protected waterfront. Multiple federal violations. Check. Every photo they took was evidence for federal prosecution. But the real entertainment started when the wedding party arrived. Brittany emerged from that ridiculous limousine in a designer gown that probably cost more than my annual property taxes, looking like a princess who'd never considered that fairy tales sometimes have unhappy endings. The beaded dress caught morning sunlight as she posed for pre-ceremony photos, completely oblivious that federal investigators were documenting her illegal commercial use of conservation property. Behind her came a parade of bridesmaids, groomsmen, and family members dressed in formal wear that screamed old money and political connections. The kind of people who'd never faced real consequences for anything in their privileged lives. They were about to get an education in physics and federal law. Delilah appeared in a mother-of-the-bride outfit that probably cost more than most people's cars, directing wedding staff like a general commanding troops. Her satisfaction was obvious as she surveyed her conquered territory. My dock transformed into her daughter's perfect venue through intimidation and harassment. She kept glancing toward my cottage, clearly wondering when I'd emerge to create problems. What she didn't realize was that I didn't need to create problems. I just needed to let federal law handle the problem solving. The ceremony began at 2 p.m., with guests filling every folding chair on the platform. 87 people, according to my count, plus catering staff, photographers, and musicians, well over the dock's safe capacity rating. The sound of string quartet music echoing across Lake Serenity was beautiful and heartbreaking, knowing how quickly that peaceful melody was about to become screams of panic and splashing water. Federal investigators positioned across the lake documented everything with professional equipment, while local festival goers gathered on public waterfront to watch what they thought was a romantic waterfront ceremony. None of them suspected they were about to witness the most spectacular enforcement of environmental protection law in county history. During the ceremony, I noticed Delilah positioning herself near the dock's release mechanism, apparently planning to interfere if I attempted to activate the separation system. Her 3 hired security guards, off-duty sheriff's deputies who clearly didn't understand federal jurisdiction, were strategically placed to prevent access to the activation points. What they didn't know about marine engineering could fill Lake Serenity. The primary release required simultaneous key activation from 2 points, but the backup manual override operated from a single location accessible only from my cottage basement through an underwater inspection hatch. Original 1967 engineering included redundant safety systems because storm damage to release mechanisms could doom the entire structure. I'd spent the week practicing emergency activation from the backup system until I could complete the sequence in under 20 seconds. As the minister pronounced Brittany and her developer Prince husband and wife, guests crowded toward the platform's end for photography and reception celebration. The dock's groaning protests were audible even over wedding music as weight distribution exceeded safe engineering limits. The bride and groom positioned themselves at the absolute end of the platform for sunset photos with the entire wedding party surrounding them. Catering staff rolled out the elaborate wedding cake for cutting ceremony. Musicians moved their equipment closer to the action. Perfect weight concentration at the dock's most vulnerable point. Everything aligned for the most satisfying demonstration of conservation law enforcement, marine engineering principles, and poetic justice that federal investigators had ever documented. Time to activate the backup release and watch 60 years of careful engineering do exactly what it was designed to do. At exactly 4:17 p.m., while 87 wedding guests crowded onto the platform's far end for the perfect golden hour photograph, I activated the emergency separation protocol. The sound was subtle at first, just a metallic click echoing across the water as 60-year-old marine engineering did exactly what it was designed to do. 4 quick-release pins disengaged simultaneously, and the outer dock section became a floating platform carrying one very expensive wedding into the middle of Lake Serenity. For about 3 seconds, nobody realized what was happening. The bride and groom continued posing with their backs to shore while the wedding photographer snapped away, completely unaware they were now drifting slowly toward deeper water. Guests kept chatting and sipping champagne as the gap between platform and main dock gradually widened. Then someone noticed the shoreline moving away. Why are we floating?" asked the maid of honor, pointing at the expanding stretch of lake water between them and safety. That's when 87 people in formal wear realized they were stranded on a floating platform with no propulsion, no steering, and no way back to shore except swimming. The screaming started immediately. Brittany's beaded wedding gown transformed from fairy tale elegance to waterlogged disaster as she stumbled toward the platform's edge, watching her perfect venue drift away from her perfect ceremony site. The white silk tent collapsed as guests panicked, sending crystal chandeliers crashing into catering equipment and wedding cake flying in every direction. "What did you do?" Delilah shrieked from the main dock, pointing at me with fury that could have powered the portable generators. "Bring them back right now!" I emerged from my cottage holding a cup of coffee and the most important phone number in environmental law enforcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced calmly as federal investigators across the lake documented everything with telephoto lenses. "You're currently experiencing unauthorized commercial use of federally protected conservation property. I'm now exercising my legal authority under the Clearwater Cove Waterfront Preservation Trust to prevent violations of environmental protection law." The EPA investigator I'd called stepped out of his fishing boat with official credentials and a federal citation book. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the Environmental Protection Agency. We've been monitoring unauthorized commercial activity on this protected conservation site." Pure chaos erupted on both sides of the expanding water gap. On shore, Delilah's security guards, off-duty sheriff's deputies who'd suddenly realized they had zero jurisdiction over federal environmental crimes, were frantically calling their supervisors for guidance. Local law enforcement arriving for crowd control found themselves face-to-face with federal agents who outranked everyone in 3 counties. On the floating platform, wedding guests in designer formal wear were calculating swimming distances to shore, while professional catering staff tried to prevent $10,000 of equipment from sliding into Lake Serenity. The bride's train was already trailing in the water as she clung to her new husband, both of them watching their perfect day become a federal crime scene. "This is illegal detention," shouted the groom's father, a prominent developer who clearly wasn't used to consequences. "You can't just strand people on a floating platform." "Actually," Agent Rodriguez replied with the satisfaction of someone who'd studied environmental law for 20 years. "Emergency separation of dock sections during unauthorized commercial use is specifically authorized under federal conservation easement regulations. The platform is structurally sound and equipped with proper flotation. Everyone is perfectly safe." The local fire department water rescue team arrived right on schedule, not to create emergency drama, but to provide safe transportation back to shore for wedding guests who preferred boats to swimming. Federal investigators had coordinated the entire operation to ensure safety while documenting every violation. Channel 7's news crew, originally positioned to cover the community festival, found themselves broadcasting live footage of federal environmental law enforcement in action. The wedding photographer, still doing his job despite the circumstances, was inadvertently creating evidence for federal prosecution. Watching Brittany's $10,000 wedding dress dissolve into lake water while her mother screamed accusations from shore, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from watching entitled bullies face consequences for the first time in their lives. The conservation easement specifically protects environmental research from commercial interference, I explained to the growing crowd of media, federal agents, and curious festival goers. Today's unauthorized wedding violated federal law, and the dock's historical safety mechanisms responded exactly as designed. As water rescue boats ferried soaked wedding guests back to shore, federal agents began issuing citations for environmental violations that carried substantial fines and potential criminal charges. Delilah's 2-year harassment campaign had finally met federal environmental law. And federal environmental law won. The taste of perfect justice was sweeter than wedding cake. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my perfectly restored dock, watching sunrise paint Lake Serenity the colors it was meant to be, drinking coffee that tastes like victory and vindication. The federal court proceedings wrapped up beautifully. Delilah received 18 months in federal prison, plus $125,000 in restitution for mail fraud, environmental harassment, and conspiracy to violate conservation law. Her husband's development company was permanently barred from environmental projects and paid $2.3 million in fines for systematic property fraud. The HOA was officially dissolved and replaced with a voluntary conservation association guided by the original 1967 covenant that started this whole beautiful mess. But the real transformation happened to our community itself. Property values recovered to fair market levels once the artificial suppression scheme ended. 3 displaced families returned using federal victim compensation funds, and the lake water quality improved dramatically when illegal upstream development was halted. The dock itself became something special, a model for community-based environmental monitoring that draws marine engineering students from 3 universities. My consulting business thrives with federal contracts for regional lake restoration, and I've got a new romantic interest with a Coast Guard environmental specialist I met during the investigation. The sweetest victory was establishing the Clearwater Environmental Education Scholarship using recovered HOA funds. Annual awards for students pursuing marine biology, environmental science, or conservation law, with preference for kids who understand that standing up to bullies sometimes requires federal law enforcement. The first recipient, Brittany herself. After her divorce from the developer's son and her mother's imprisonment, she enrolled in environmental restoration studies at the state university. Turns out, watching your fairy tale wedding become a federal crime scene provides excellent motivation for understanding environmental protection law. She stopped by last month to apologize and thank me for the scholarship that's funding her education. We sat on the same dock where her wedding went sideways, talking about water quality monitoring and conservation easements like civilized people. "I never understood what my mother was doing to you and the other neighbors," she admitted, watching sunrise reflect off clean lake water. I just wanted a perfect wedding and didn't ask where the perfect venue came from. The annual Lake Heritage Weekend has replaced our old community festival, featuring educational booths on water quality, native species restoration, and sustainable development. Former adversaries participate in restoration volunteer projects, and local artists display work inspired by lake ecosystem preservation. My Homeowner's Guide to Environmental Protection and Property Rights became an unexpected bestseller, teaching citizens how to research conservation easements, document harassment, and understand federal protection laws. The takeaway message resonates with people everywhere. Every property owner has more legal protection than they realize. You just need to know where to look. Documentary filmmaker created a 90-minute film called The Wedding That Sank a Conspiracy, which airs regularly on environmental cable networks. Legal schools use the case for property rights courses, and the EPA created a citizen reporting portal modeled on my documentation methods. The ripple effects spread beyond our little lake community. Neighboring HOAs reviewed their structures for similar fraud patterns, and state legislature passed stronger oversight requirements for homeowner association financial management. National property rights organizations established legal defense funds inspired by our case success. Where is everyone now? Delilah serves her sentence at minimum security federal facility with supervised probation ahead. Her husband operates a small landscaping business permanently banned from real estate development. Brittany works toward her environmental science degree while advocating for ethical development practices. Mrs. Patterson became our community historian, documenting the original conservation vision that protected us all. And me? I'm exactly where I belong, on my dock, monitoring water quality, drinking morning coffee, and watching federal environmental law keep the bullies at bay. Sometimes the biggest criminals are the ones who think political connections make them untouchable. But federal environmental law gives every citizen tools to fight corruption. You just have to be willing to do the research and stand up for what's right. The lake is cleaner, the community is stronger, and one corrupt HOA learned that conservation easements matter more than political power.
60 wedding guests floating away on a detective dog session. That's not something you see every day, even in HOA warfare. But the real story isn't Brittany ruined designer gown or the $10,000 of catering equipment sliding into Lake Serenity. It's how Meredith turned 2 years of systematic harassment into 18 months of federal prison time for the leader. Most people would have voted after the fake EPA letter, the cancer insurance, or that ridiculous environmental terrorism arrest. But Meredith kept digging until she found that 1967 conservation easement, 55 years of buried federal protection that made the Leah entire property grab scheme legally impossible. Think about it. The leaders spent millions assembling waterfront lot for a luxury development that federal law prohibited from day one. On that corruption, on the bribe to county official, on that harassment for project that could never be built. The dog separation wasn't just revenge, it was environmental law enforcement with a sense of humor. When you're conducting federally protected research and someone hosts an unauthorized commercial wedding on your conservation property, well, emergency safety protocol exists for a reason. Now, the Leah doing time, her husband banned from development, and that community has permanent federal protection. Even better, the scholarship fund for environmental students is funded by criminal restitution money. Have you ever checked if your property has conservation protections you don't know about? Because somewhere in the dusty county records might be exactly what you need against your own neighborhood tyrants. Like this if you enjoy watching a corrupt HOA meet federal environmental law. Subscribe for more story where homework beat harassment. Knowledge isn't just power. Sometimes it's the perfect weapon.